Stellaris is all about discovery, and during your journey of discovery you will encounter all sorts of things. And some of these events will give you strange new ships. Ships with models or functions you've likely never encountered before. Today we're going to be taking a look at some of these ships. Some of them are uncommon, some of them are rare, and there is one instance that is essentially impossible to get without jumping through a series of very, very unlikely hoops. And I'm not entirely sure why the developers have made it that way. Let's dive right into the rarest ships in Stellaris. In some cases, you will start the game and you will be given a bunch of starter events. You need to find the hyacinth, or you need to go out and scan a couple of planets for extinction events, etc. This particular ship, called the Prototype class, is part of the Wanderlust chain. The Wanderlust chain has a 1% chance of spawning upon beginning your game. Now, this ship by itself doesn't really appear all that interesting. It is basically the same model as your standard science ship that you have at the start of the game, and it is really the fact that this particular type of ship, the name and how you get it, is why it is so rare. You'll have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops, killing a whole bunch of pirates, but that's not really the difficult part. Getting the event chain to start is the more difficult part of this particular chain. In addition, if you finish this chain, there's also a 50% chance that the Unbidden will show up at the end of the game, but hey, in the end you still have your very cool spaceship that you can play around with. Speaking of Unbidden, the science ship from beyond is one of the events that can spawn relatively frequently. Before you know it, one of your science ship is floating around and poof, they pop into the void to some place where you have no idea where they went. All of a sudden, they pop back out from some sort of weird dimension, and their ship has turned into a different ship, a completely strange dimensional duplicate, and half of the crew seems to be missing. The spaceship from beyond is relatively uncommon, but you will see it floating around every once in a while. I find it interesting though, because the ship that you get from Wanderlust used to have this model, but not anymore. And I don't know why they changed it. And this is going to be something that we'll be talking about again in a little bit. Some ships cannot be found, but they can most definitely be bought. Introducing the Racket Industrial Enterprise Caravaneer Destroyer, which you can buy, as mentioned, from the Racket Industrial Enterprise. It's relatively rare for it to pop up, because you first will need to have the Racket Industrial Enterprise in your galaxy, then them visiting you, and then having the opportunity to buy it. And is it good? Well, not really, not necessarily. Sure, if you can get it early in the game, it can be quite potent with a decent hyperdrive. It's got a plasma cannon on it, but not much more. It's a bit of a weird one, but it does look very, very sexy. Similar to Wanderlust, the Great Disciples is one of the events that can pop up at the start of the game, and it will send you on a wild goose chase around your local cluster, where you will have to find this religious cult that is hiding somewhere amongst the stars. Still though, the event tends to kinda bug out a little bit, where the final stage of the actual event not triggering properly forever, being lost at the center of the galaxy. However, if you manage to get all the way to the end, you will be rewarded with a unique type of ship. This is, of course, the Divine Glory Cruiser. Now, the Divine Glory is a unique model. It looks pretty swanky. It's not all that great, though. Sure, it's got a decent amount of hull points and a bunch of guns, but its overall firepower is rather not that great. Let's put it that way. Still, though, it looks cool, and I really wish there were more of these types of events at the start of the game, except for the 4 that we have, which is this one and the other one, including Wanderlust, which we already talked about. But we still got more ships on the list, so let's get over there. Now, the ship that you're seeing right now is definitely unique, but it's not the ship that we're going to be talking about in this particular segment. This is a Nomad home ship, and they only show up if you do not have Megacorp or Megacorp installed. Yes, the Caravaneers completely replace the Nomads, but it doesn't mean that you can buy stuff from said Nomads. Yes, the Cruiser class cruiser, or the Nomad class cruiser, which is buyable from them, is rather interesting, because you can buy not only one, you can buy 5 of them. They are rather powerful. A small fleet of 3.1k is definitely not something that you should overlook. It's very much about the point-blank range stuff here, though, with a lot of plasmas and a point defense and all that sort of thing. Plus, it can go pretty darn quick, has some good armor and good shields. But yeah, you can only get this if you somehow encounter the Nomads, and if you don't have Megacorp installed. Very unique model, pretty darn cool, and it pops up somewhere else again with a little friend. Now, this fleet that you're seeing right now may not look all that strange, except for the fact that it has a Fallen Empire type of ship within it. Yes, this is, in fact, a special fleet that you can get from the Sentinels. Who are the Sentinels? Well, if you manage to let the Praetorian Scourge take over half the galaxy, a new faction will spawn called the Sentinels, and they will give you a bunch of ships. And that by itself is pretty rare. However, this wasn't always like this, and I knew about this. I knew that this was different in the past. I couldn't pinpoint it, so I had to go out on a wild goose chase to find out what these ships used to look like, because they didn't used to look like this. No, they used to look like this. This is the 1.0 version of the game where the Sentinels will give you these ships, and more specifically, this very strange type of model that is available. And what is this type of model that we're seeing here right now? This is the Starfang model. Now, the Starfang model doesn't spawn anywhere within the game. I've gone through quite a lot of files and I cannot find any evidence that it's no longer being used anywhere. And I don't understand why, because it looks pretty darn cool, even if it only spawns in a very specific event that can only happen in the end game in a very specific scenario, and in order to get it, you need to roll your game back to like 1.1 or 1.2. Talk about rare. This one is basically impossible to get unless you know what you're doing. Don't you think it's a real shame that these models are no longer in the game, or at least they're in the game, they're just no longer being used anymore? Let me know down below what you think about this, because it's such a shame that some of this stuff has been taken out and replaced with just generic things. And also, make sure you leave a like for every single unique ship that you've ever found within the game. Let's march onwards to the Sunken Cruiser. This absolutely gorgeous piece of work is the Sunken Cruiser, and it's relatively unique that it's part of a colony event. Now, colony events there are not that many of them in the game, and basically what they do is you colonize a planet and an event pops up, and the Seafallen Cruiser is part of one of those, where you colonize a ocean world, you find something underneath the waves, and you can go ahead and research it, and in some cases it may explode, and in other cases you get this thing. Now, you can either get Devastation or this particular cool ship, which I think is pretty nice. Now, the Seafallen Cruiser is incredibly sexy. It has a lot of good firepower, but that's probably the reason why you would never send it into battle, because it's way too precious. It belongs into a museum. Paradox, if you're watching this, then add some sort of mechanic to add these unique ships to a quote-unquote museum, and we can get diplomatic power out of it or something like that, because I'm never going to send these bad boys into space. Now, this one is so stupidly rare, I literally could not find footage of it. I'm not even kidding. Like, the Grand Herald is so impossible to find within the game. You need to find a dig site that almost never spawns. Then you need to go through said dig sites to get a Titan out of the ground that maybe functions at about 25% of its normal power, which by itself is already crazy. But the Grand Herald is so dumbfoundingly rare, I don't understand why it is like this. Like, it will never spawn. I probably have 1 or 2 save files from the last 2 years that it spawned. Back in Distant Stars, this thing would pop up every single game. It was basically the same thing as, like, Biosphere in a Jupiter and in a Jovian planet or something along those lines. I have not seen this stupid thing since so long, and it's just so frustrating, and it's so rare. Ever wanted your own pet Praetorian Scourge Fleet? Well, with one simple step, you can get one, and that's by just getting yourself a special relic called the Mother, or the Hive Queen. Yes, you can find this thing floating around in space if you're being invaded by the Scourge, and you just have to go out and capture it and bring it back home and click the button and there you go. Not necessarily the rarest, even though you still need to get the Scourge to begin with, and getting to the end game can be a bit of a hassle sometimes, but you know, you can play as the Scourge, which by itself is pretty cool. It's just not something that you do very often. It's time to talk about the rarest of the rare. A ship that is so difficult to get that you can only get it by console command. It is the Judgement, better known as Event Ship 03, and it looks like this. Yes, this is the ship in question. It is very strange, and I'm pretty sure that at one point in time it did spawn within the game. However, currently there are no events within the game that uses this particular model. Whether or not it was the case back in, say, 1.0 or 1.2 that this model was being used, I do not know. I don't know why this was removed from the game either. As it is right now, as you see it on screen in front of you, this is not a working ship. This is just an object that I had to spawn in the game. That's how difficult it is to get. It is kind of reminiscent from, say, some of the ships of EVE Online, where you can have a Apocalypse or a Armageddon. It kind of feels like that. But in the meantime, it's just impossible to get. And if you know where to get this outside of mods or where it used to spawn, let me know down below where it did so I can go ahead and find it, because I am so curious about why this was removed. Paradox, if you're watching this, I know that on some days you just have your developers or whomever is on the team just to do whatever they want. Can you please ask them just to make a series of random event ships that you can use for a variety of things? Because having all these models within the game is so cool, and it adds so much more flavor to things, and I think it's so upsetting to see that a lot of this cool stuff has fallen by the wayside. I had to go into the art book to find a lot of this stuff, and there is more ships that just aren't used anymore. Originally, I was going to have Ahab in this. I was going to have Gray in this. But the ships that we've seen so far or today are so much rarer than those and so much more difficult to get. What do you think? Have I missed something? Is there a ship that you think is far rarer than this? Then leave your comments below. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like. If you want to see more stuff regarding rare things in Stellaris, check out this video that is on your screen right now. It will take you to the rarest events within the game. Yes, the Grand Herald is in there as well. Who knows what is going to pop up as in addition? Maybe the Crystal Enclave. Who knows? I want to thank my patrons so much for making this video possible, and until next time, take good care of yourselves, and as always, each other.